I see we're an A at networking, so give yourselves a round of applause on that one. That was pretty weak. Come on now, give yourself a better round of applause for that. So I got to tell you, we've been working on this for about a year to plan this. About a year ago, everybody knows the Secretary of Defense, right? How big he is. He told General Brown and I at a Christmas event. We asked him, "What can we do from AUSA for the Secretary of Defense?" He said, "Help me fix the industrial base." And so you guys being here today is a big deal. And this turnout is great. And we're fired up to start our first panel. So our first panel of the day will focus on supply chain health. The health of the industrial base has been a subject of recent concern, both within DoD and among defense contractors. This panel will discuss opportunities to partner with industry for addressing the Army's supply chain challenges and continue collaboration between the Army, DLA, and industry. Today we have Mr. Jay Brannam, Executive Director of the Munitions Industrial Base Task Force, and our sponsor for today to moderate this panel. Jay serves as the Executive Director, and he's responsible for planning, leading, and coordinating the activities, operations, and finances of the MIBTL. Some of his previous positions in his more than 30-year career include the Pentagon Liaison for PEO Ammunitions, now Joint PEO Armaments and Ammunition, and the Senior Ground Combat Analyst, Director, Program Analyst and Evaluation, that's PA&E, at the Marine Corps Systems Command. Currently, he also serves as the Treasurer for the Washington, D.C. chapter of the National Defense Industrial Association. Jay holds a BA in Economics from George Mason University, a Master's of Science in Systems Management from Capital College, and certificate in management from Darden School of Business. Jay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I am pleased to be a part of this panel and very distinguished. I'm pleased to introduce Lieutenant General Mark Simerly. I found it interesting that he started out as air defense artillery before he moved into logistics. And he has a long history of working and supporting the Army and the Joint Force in supporting logistics. Moving to Miss Liz Miranda, she is the Executive Deputy to the Commanding General at AMC and is responsible for the material lifecycle management, acquisition support, personnel and resource management, industrial base operations, and enterprise integration for the Global Command of 165 military, civilian, and contractor employees. Next, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant General Retired Mary Legere. Setting aside her academics, we had a conversation when we first introduced ourselves a couple days ago, and I was struck by, as an intelligence officer, she went and the first thing she did was go look up my name and just figure out if she owed me money. But one of the conversation points that we had is, she says, "I don't know why I'm part of this panel, but I think there's a strong tie between the logistics and intelligence in the sense that both sides are trying to fit pieces to the puzzle together to understand the world." And so with that, so for the panel discussion, supply chain health, and really the abstract for this is the DoD supply chains are vital to the U.S. national security and defense strategy objectives. We must assume, and there's some evidence, that our adversaries are mapping our supply chains to degrade our warfighting capabilities and impair our ability to reconstitute them during the conflict. What efforts is the Department of Defense and industry taking in a broader context of strategic competition with China and other adversaries? How is the DoD and industry assessing supply chain risk and balance to the new weapon systems and sustaining old ones? This panel will discuss how these efforts shape supply chain health for DoD acquisition and sustainment. So, first question for the panel, and just chime up as you want to volunteer to answer any particular question. Each of the military services are in various stages of what is largely characterized as transformation. As we rush to recapitalize aging weapon systems and retire old iron and retool for peer-to-peer competition seeking to deter conflict, how is the uninterrupted supply repair parts, both depot level reparables and consumables, impacting your ability to sustain existing systems and modernize capabilities? And to follow on to that is, what is your thought on the appropriate levels of breadth and depth to stock preparation for the next potential conflict? Is just-in-time dead? And are we planning the appropriate resources within the procurement and O&M accounts to buy some of that depth back?
How about now? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. And I just want to thank AUSA for hosting this. And it's great to be on this panel. What a great chance to reconnect with so many colleagues that I have and that, DLA is responsible for partnering with, but also make some new connections. And I just have to say, this association is special, but we also have reliance upon other associations which allow us to connect with industry. So I'm grateful for those. We're going to continue to rely upon our associations. We may even be seeking to reorganize some of the associations as the defense industry base reorganizes. And so we could be relevant, but I think there's great opportunity there, and I appreciate this opportunity today. I think it's a really relevant question. And the fact that this is a hot topic is very telling in terms of where we are in the Department of Defense and where we are in the Army. I can remember the days not too long ago when the hot topic was kill chain instead of supply chain, right? For all the right reasons. I mean, we have a common purpose of wanting to be able to produce a lethal, enduring combat capability. And we do that through kill chains. We also do that through supply chains. And I think more and more that's evident to our leaders. If you've been reading the Early Bird the last few weeks, you've seen multiple reports, advice coming from the Defense Business Board, the Defense Innovation Board on supply chains and how that we strengthen them, how we tie into the industrial base. All very relevant questions, all things that we're working on. Many of you are aware of the term and the concept of contested logistics, right? So this is a term that we've been using for 3 or 4 years now to heighten our awareness and to shape our planning so that we can protect our ability to sustain the fight. Contested in all domains, contested at all levels of war, contested in the homeland, contested in the industrial base. And when we say contested, we're not saying that it's just something that's going to happen to us when we shift to conflict. It's an aspect of competition that we're all enduring now that's having an impact on our ability to support the fight. Within DLA, we've got enormous responsibility to support the entire joint force. And the Army is a critical component of that. And we're very aware of the specific readiness challenges. And we have seen attrition of some of our capability in the industrial base to support those readiness imperatives. I'll talk a little bit more about that and what we need to do to shore those up. But it's common across all the services. It's not unique to the Army by any means. And so as I think about DLA and its responsibilities, just like we heard, each of the services going through a deep transformation cycle currently, we have to make sure that our logistics capability is also going through a deep transformation. That's certainly what we are in the midst of in the Defense Logistics Agency, this strategic shift, this transformation, if you will, kind of taking a logistics behemoth and turning it into a combat support juggernaut and operationalizing aspects of the agency. So we are going to be relevant and able to operate at the speed of war, right? And the framework that we use for that within the agency, fourfold, are people, precision, posture, and partnerships. And within each one of those imperatives, we've got specific things that we know we must do. On the people side, we have to have the ability to understand the warfighting conditions and connect with the warfighters. And we have to do that with greater data acumen. We have to develop leaders who value this collaboration and this transparency with industry all the way to the warfighters on the tactical edge. with precision, we can't afford to be imprecise. We have to have the exquisite supply chain understanding and readiness understanding to make the right decisions. And that's part of a shift away from ruthless efficiency, born of the Cold War era and post-Cold War era, to resilience. And how do we resource resilience ties into the next imperative, which is posture, right? So having the right presence, having the right position, and having the right stance so that we can provide the readiness where it's needed, both in the current fight and for future fights. And as we think about that fight, the fight is not only defined by the term contested logistics that we think of. I think we have to be very mindful that the scale is global and the time frame is protracted, right? I think we have to get over the mythology of the short, sharp fight and understand what we have to prepare for. And then it gets to partnerships, right? So obviously, better integrating within the joint force and all the elements of the joint force so we can anticipate requirements in a more precise manner. Integrating with our partners where we can take advantage of their capabilities while we provide capabilities within those alliances and coalitions that we're part of. And then critical to discuss today are partnerships with industry, where we can have a common understanding of risk, a common understanding of opportunities to enhance the depth and resilience of our supply chains. So I know that didn't answer all aspects of your question, but I just wanted to frame a little bit of how we're thinking about this problem set. Thank you.
So thank you also from my perspective at AMC. Thank you all for being here. I know that it's a panel. I'm really looking forward to those tough questions, but I'm also going to put some questions to you, right? Because this, as John Mohan earlier stated, right, the right people are in this room to address some of the most challenging, situations that we have in terms of supply chain health. But to the question specifically, so the first part of the question talks about transformation, right, and what that transformation means for the Army. Recapitalize aging weapon systems, retire old iron. We don't retire almost anything, right? We reuse, repurpose is the word, right? Repurpose.
I represent.
Yes. So therefore, right, we are certainly in the cusp of transforming, but we have a responsibility to maintain, sustain those legacy enduring capabilities. Because we're gonna use them, right? We're gonna use them at some point. Bradley's being an example, firefighter radars being an example, right? And we really, for sometimes, had that supply chain dormant, right? Because we had a plan to not utilize those capabilities until we needed those capabilities. So how do we look at this holistically? Diminishing manufacturing sources, right, and materials shortages it's a problem that we're all living with, and why we have seen significant increase in our lead times. These delinquencies that John Mohan also talked about in the billions, and so how do we maintain these enduring and legacy capabilities that we know we're going to need in a state of readiness to fight, right? So one of the areas of opportunities, if you will, to provide that precision sustainment, and this is my ask to you all, what do we need to do differently? Because yes, we don't have all the money in the world to maintain everything, hot and ready, right? We may have to keep some things warm and some things cold so that we can leverage and focus on the right things that our Army needs and our soldiers need to fight. In a resource-constrained environment, that's very challenging. So my ask to you all to start thinking about, right, to answer this question, just in time is supposed to be very efficient, but in a very volatile operational environment and supply chain, right? So it's not the optimal, right, way to operate, but it is the reality. So with that in mind, what do we need to do differently? right? From an Army perspective and from industry's perspective, to again, have what we need when we need it. So that scenario that General Mohan articulated before and shared with you is executable effectively, right? To provide that soldier what they need when they need it. So I know I'm not necessarily answering the question, but because this is a problem that requires all of our, effort and ideas to really do what we need to do. John Mohan touched on modernization efforts for maintenance and supply management. With that comes a responsibility to, so what do we need to do contractually, whether industry to sub-tiers of suppliers, whether Army sharing data, right, and providing you that demand signal for a greater, period of time frame, or operational environment specific, right? So that we can collectively identify the best solutions to this problem. We cannot continue to operate the way we're operating today. So we need to find different ways, creative ways to get after those mechanisms that will help us execute that battlefield that General Mohan showed you. It is the battlefield of today and tomorrow, and we're not structured, and we're not today. We're not ready to execute that in the most efficient manner. So, what do we need to do? Again, I'm asking you for what do you think the Army needs to do, and I'm gonna share with you some of my thoughts on what I believe industry can do to help us get there sooner rather than later. So I'll pause because I know there's tons of other questions, but I just wanted to frame some of the conversation because it's a really good question to start the dialogue.
And I think just to answer that question that I know has been on your mind since you said, why do you have an Intel person up here? I think that as we look at modernizing or transforming the defense industrial base and we think about where are we in that journey, the Intel officer always points out we don't do anything in a vacuum. And the global supply chains and value chains are being rewired as we sit in this room based on megatrends. So part of my job here today is to remind you that the Army does not operate inside its own world. And we need to be very mindful of, first, what we're seeing in the world in terms of that greater supply chain challenge, that as we once again devolve into bipolar worlds where we have arsenals of, where we have democracies going up against arsenals of autocrats and just disruption, and their supply chains are operating and organizing to be in this contested logistics world, we need to pay attention to the macro trends and understand that all of the world, and so this gets to my other point, not only am I the former to and a burden to the logistics community, so for the generations out there that said, I have new kit, so I was absolutely like, of course I'm gonna need 5 different types of UASs and micro and make your supply chain work for me. So I apologize. Number 2, I always wanted to be a logistics officer at some point as a first lieutenant. They made me the battalion S4. And I discovered why the logisticians in the MI battalion always had the best kit. We're never cold. The equipment always worked. And I love that. And I thought, if this Intel gig doesn't work out, these are my people. I also was introduced for the first time as a first lieutenant to the phrase from the supply NCO, ma'am, don't ask. So I love the spirit of there is no challenge that my logisticians weren't going to solve for me regardless of the advantage. But today, I left the Army in 2016 with tremendous concerns that as the Intel community was living in the age of AI, were we paying attention to what that meant? If the world was moving to digital, did we, as a joint and combined in a multinational force, have the understanding of the dotlums of digital? That whether the world was safe and benign and we didn't have multi-domain operations and we weren't in a third undeclared war, would we have enough knowledge to be able to grab this age and help us as an intel community, as a Department of Defense, to take advantage of the advances in technology to bring that to our specific functions and to the national security needs of our country. And so I purposefully left the Army and joined a company that was really good at digital technology and digital transformation so that I could learn the DOTLMs of digital. How is the world moving faster than the Department of Defense? How are the supply chains that support transportation, aviation, health, how are they moving faster than the defense industrial base? What can we learn? What are the basic principles that they have that we need? And so I can't tell you, as somebody that's been on the self-education of being that person in the middle that has great experience in the Department of Defense and a strong understanding of how joint warfighting works. The comments resonated with me that we can't flush the experience of this room, but the experience in this room has to upskill into the age that we're in. 3 things we need to understand. Global supply chains are being rewired as we sit in this room for 3 or 4 really important reasons. Number 1, geopolitically, you're going to ask a question. Haven't we all had supply chain challenges? Every generation in this room has faced existential threat to national security supply chains. Everyone in this room contributed to finding solutions. This generation of the greatest logisticians that ever speak, and all of us, are in the age of AI. We need to rise to this challenge. The level and speed and pace of change is something that we have to understand. There is going to be constant disruption. So the answer to the question, which I thought was a quiz, is just-in-time logistics, that was dead a long time ago. So global supply chains are reacting to geopolitical realities of the world dividing again and camps forming. And where you look at Russia and Ukraine as Russia and Ukraine, no, this is Russia, Ukraine, China, and the arsenal of autocrats who are in it for a long fight, and Ukraine is just the first stop. And it is to divert us from Indo-Pac objectives of that as well. So understand what we're up against, a long struggle where, once again, supply chains are going to choose sides. So we have to unextract ourselves from global supply chains now and create local and at home supply chains, or with our allies, that take care of the needs of our defense industry that once would have been perfectly okay with having a relationship with a country that today is on the opposite side of our. So supply chains are being rewired for geopolitical reasons. Supply chains are profoundly affected by technology in a very positive way, in that it was so delightful this morning listening to a logistician speak about the importance of data as if it were the ammunition that was going to drive this age, and understand we need the skill sets and the platforms and the workforce and the talent and the procedures to take advantage of it. And what it brings us when we do that, of manufacturing at the edge, advanced manufacturing at the edge by our youngsters on 3D printers, because they have the technical data that they never knew to ask for. This is the age that we're in. So in a positive way, we can be different if we understand how to leverage it. But in a negative way, if we don't, and we don't understand our adversaries are in fact using new technology in an adversarial way to basically take every part of our supply chain and make it vulnerable, because it is all interconnected, and that is an attack surface. Why would I come at the formation of tanks when I can just go at the supply depot and take all of that out? So the agility and dispersal that's required today, because of our ability to see and sense each other, there's no place to hide. So technology is a factor. And guys, climate change is a factor. And I won't spend too much time on that, but as you watch Europe lose its lines of communications due to massive flooding, as you watch the fires engulf one of our major metropolitan cities, as you watch the effects of supply, that is different than when we were coming up. These are not happening once a year. This isn't a tsunami that loses 100,000 people in the Asia Pacific and we wait for 3 years from now. They're happening every month, every week. that affects every one of the logisticians and the industrial base in this room. So thinking about those three factors, geopoliticals is forcing us to bring our supply chains away from global into something more local. Second, understanding technology can help us or it can hurt us. And if we're not literate and taking advantage of it, then we're creating a disadvantage. And the third thing is, from a climate change perspective, every plan you put in place needs to have a second and third plan. And that agility that you get by being able to see yourself provides that. The ability then to use machines to help you war game through and anticipate your options becomes important. The last thing which should delight everyone in this audience, as you understand, we have expended every 155 round in Europe. We are critically short as we look at the wars that are occurring in the Middle East, where we're providing support. In Europe, where we're in a full-fledged contest in multi-domain, and in the Pacific, where we always have to be postured. There's just a demand for military supply, and not military supply that's obsolete, but the new materials that are necessary. So this group must come together. There's with a sense of urgency. And my sense is from listening and reading AMC, also watching what's coming out of the G4, the Army, DLA, have all of that in their sights. They too are bringing the age of digital into the dotlums of sustainment and logistics. They're going to take advantage of that great partnership that we are just beginning to explore. How do we use machines in the absence of people to help us create more capacity? How do we get comfortable with that? How do we build trust with this experienced workforce, that magnificent mechanic with 14 years of experience that is at the edge, who we cannot lose, but we must upskill and keep? That young person that was in lawn care, that we must keep that experience, but arm them with the skills that we have today. So my job today is, first and foremost, with Accenture as a global defense advisor, is to understand where digital is in the United States Department of Defense, but also reflect on where our allies are, and can we find a way to accelerate, because we have no time. Thanks.
John, do you want? All right. Given the significant challenge facing the health of the Army's industrial base, such as consolidation, labor shortages, and the Department of Defense's struggles to attract new and innovative entrants, what strategic initiatives is the Defense Logistics Agency implementing to address these concerns and ensure a resilient and competitive defense industrial base?
Well, first of all, I have to say, Mary's comments are a really good indicator that you get us and you get it, right? And I think that's what we're seeing across the board, right? We understand the importance of this topic and the importance of focusing on this aspect of readiness, current readiness and future readiness that we call logistics, supply chain health, in the industrial base. Just to give some context for DLA, our role within the Department of Defense. Last year, we had about $52 billion worth in obligations from the services that we're fulfilling. A record year for us, right? And that's even, not including the years that we've been in conflict, right? In the declared sense. So that, that growth is an indicator of the expanded need and expanded investment in our future readiness. I'd like to say also that a large part of that obligation is fulfilled by our small businesses. And, in fact, about 60% of the business that we get goes to small businesses. 80% of our suppliers are small businesses. And so 8,000 plus suppliers, a critical component of what we do. But that number 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, has been reduced by over 20%. In some sectors, even further. And we're pleased that over the last 2 years, the rate of reduction has been down to about the 1 or 2% range. We had a few years when it was 5, 6, 7% loss in our supplier base. So we know some things have started to level out, but we don't really consider that a win to just be watching fewer losses rather than start to gain. So, we need to take action to improve the number of players, reduce the barriers to entry, and allow our partners to have a greater persistent role in the industrial base. We've got 9 different supply chains. You're familiar with them. We also have 2 critical services, distribution and disposition, that we provide to the entire Department of Defense. So when we think of the traditional primes in the defense industrial base, key component, especially when we talk about weapon system readiness, but for us, it's much broader than that. So we typically think of the American industrial base or the national industrial base as being a key component in our defense ecosystem. So we have to nurture and understand all of the pressures on those different segments. Clothing and textiles that produces our uniforms, tremendous pressure on the industrial base there. And of course, you know that we are relying strictly upon domestic suppliers for that. So last year, when we had what's been reported as 21 different plants close in the U.S., that has a significant impact on the resilience of our supply chain. And why are they closing, right? A variety of factors, no doubt. The most critical one in that field is the pressure from offshore sources of supply, in the entire production ecosystem and manufacturing. And we've got to find ways to reverse that. We've got to find ways to strengthen our own resilience with the industrial base in these different sectors. And we have to do it with precision. And when I mean precision, we have to really be able to measure where we're making gains and where we're taking losses in our capacity. And we have to evaluate that risk, and we have to prioritize investments. And it can't be something that one service is doing independently or another service is looking at from a different way. We have to find ways to prioritize and measure in common terms so we can make the right risk decisions. And I think the DLA has a key role in establishing those, not the lead. I think that lead is at OSD, and they've been appointed with that from a supply chain management, supply chain risk management, and a supply chain illumination standpoint. But we're a critical enabler because of our responsibility of being connected with each of the services and with so many members of the industrial base. So we've got to devise solutions. Part of those solutions will rely upon data, rely upon a better relationship with data and a better employment of data. So being able to understand end-to-end risk. And, the Army's been iterating on this concept for some time, sensor to shooter to sustainer, right? That critical link, so we're expanding the kill chain into the supply chain. From where I sit and where our industry partners sit, I think we have to go further level, sensor, shooter, sustainer, supplier, to ensure we have those linkages and that common view. And that's in part Defense Logistics Agency's responsibility to develop the means to do that. And I think later on I might have a chance to talk about some of the specific approaches that we have from a contracting standpoint that will get after some of that risk reduction.
General Simerly covered it all. Exactly my notes.
So I understand DLA relies heavily on small business partners to provide a level of resilience to the supply chain critical parts. What do you see as the role and importance of small business to lower risk within our supply chains?
Yeah, I think I got ahead a little bit on talking about that with the role of small businesses on the last question, but I would add to it a little bit. As I mentioned, 80% of our partners are small businesses. We give a large part of our business through the primes, but how do we focus on, just like they do, those sub-tier suppliers? How do we look at how we're adding resilience for them as well is a key question for us. And we see the benefits of the small business sector in innovation, agility, adaptability that are critical components in solving this problem set, reframing the way we focus on it. And I really like the language that I read from the Defense Innovation Board when they talk about rapidly accelerating entry for non-traditional vendors who bring forth ambition and ideas. So that's part of the value equation we see through small business relationships. And we're proud that over the past 12 years, we've met all the small business goals we've been given by the department, and they are significant. But it's not enough. And we've got to add depth, and we've got to change it so we're not losing partners, we're growing partners.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is retention, right? So once we ensure that they enter our supply chain, that we retain those critical capabilities. And I think it was said before, right? The only way we can do that is really understanding, have the data to understand where our risk areas are, because suppliers will come and go. That is just the nature of the business, right? They will make the business decision to either stay or go somewhere else and do something else. And unfortunately, we are in a reacting mode, right? We find out when we need something and they are not there to support, right? So one of the areas that I believe is critical is informing, right? As we enter them, have that relationship, whether contractual or otherwise, to continue to gather data from them, not necessarily just when we go after a component or something that we need. No, more understanding of their own health, right? If they're experiencing challenges, whether for material, whether for workload, right? Production, acquisition of their own components, whatever it is, right? But understanding what challenges they have, because we have to collectively figure out then how to keep them healthy, to maintain them, right? To retain them in our supply chain. Data is going to be a critical component of that. How do we get that information so that we can inform our risk and make our own, investment decisions going long term?
I'd like to just to leave this because there are small businesses and there are also traditional suppliers in the room. Mark spoke to the trust that goes from sensor to shooter to sustainer to supplier to manufacturer. That transparency that it's nice that we tell you we've expended that ammunition, that ability to see ourselves and understand what is our capacity based on real-time data. If it starts from Department of Defense going to the edge and it doesn't extend back to the supply chain, we have two problems. Number one, so the trust that we're going to need now, that the Department of Defense is going to ask for to realize what you're talking about, is being willing to share, have it protected so you protect your competitiveness. But we can't find out 10 days later that one specific or two specific factories that were providing those two specific things has been hit by a labor crisis or something local or an environmental calamity and is gone. That can't be after the fact. So as we think of the way global supply chains that have it wired from user to the end, it's because they share that common situational understanding of their importance to one another. It lets us onboard and offboard when that company makes that pivot. We're at the end of innovation here. We're now going to pivot to something else. But I think ultimately for supply chains to be as agile, Mark, as you and this future generation of logisticians is going to be, Department of Defense needs the defense industrial base best idea of how do we make sure we can see it. Now, the mandates tell you there should be no part of the supply chain in the defense industrial base down to the second and third tier provider that you shouldn't be able to identify. So we know that by regulation and mandate to be part of the club, you have that data. Are you willing to share it so that we can see it in real time and understand it would be used for the right purposes? And so that trust of creating, not just doing digital, it's a nice couple things, but being a digital industrial supply base is going to speak to us having to be able to address that issue. And what I guess I can tell you is other industries and other sectors that may be less important to the national security of our world have figured that out. And we need to rely on their ability that, one, they care about competitiveness, so they're not going to give away the farm. but they want to know in the transportation industry, if one airline goes down due to a hub issue somewhere, how that traffic is going to be redirected. How are they doing that to maintain real-time agility? And how can the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, which may be America first, but needs to be regional with those allies that we trust in their manufacturing capability, how do we create that awareness? So small business has a place, but we can't be surprised.
And I'll just add to that, as we think about what's required to increase capacity, reduce lead times in the industrial base, things that we've talked about in terms of making precise investments in supply chain depth, establishing a steady demand pulse so we can give that lead time to industry, incentivizing surge capability and surge metrics. But one of the keys to the way that we do that is to be able to see ourselves and measure performance. And I think about it in a way that I learned from General Brown some time ago as a matter of digital interoperability. And the truth is, three components or three dimensions of interoperability: human, technical, procedural. We can achieve and have achieved the technical means to do this. We have to overcome the human restrictions, the trust that's necessary, within the limitations of our protection schemes, and being willing to accept some risk there as we understand our attack surface and how we ensure the integrity of our data. But also procedurally understand what data needs to be shared and how and when. So we've got to fix that to achieve that digital interoperability. And one of the things that we're working with that I think is going to have benefits to all the services is a tool that allows us to better assess supply chain health within the industry, within each of our sectors of the industrial base. So being able to drill down into those second, third tier suppliers, being able to drill down in the critical material supply chains that have an influence and map out all of those with a risk-informed view. And so we've got a tool applying, really state-of-the-art AI that allows us to go out in the public sector and scrape all the data that we can achieve, all that we can access, and bring it in to create a picture that we can iterate with that gets us past descriptive views of our current status and allows us to start to forecast and combine those with our forecasted requirements to understand risk in a holistic fashion. So I think there's tremendous potential there, not only with that tool. The other aspect that I'll mention is our supply chain. So I mentioned 9 different supply chains. Guess what? 9 different supply chain strategies. And we acknowledge, big different characteristics in the material, food and fuel, medical supplies, right? They're going to have to be managed differently. But we should have common terms, common metrics as we measure performance and risk. So at the agency level, we're elevating those supply chains so we can refine our vision for performance, and we can describe them in a more coherent manner to ensure that they're adequately enabled, resourced, and integrated at the enterprise level beyond the supply chain level.
And so I leave to the audience of suppliers. Mark described the effort in DLA, and I know the Army AMC as well, of creating a visibility on the supply chain. And you're using third-party data right now to test, hey, how does it look? For the industry, being able to leave and figure out how do we deal with the trust of self-report, ensuring that the data that we are presenting to our government client is based on truth, because the life of somebody's child may rely on your supply chain. And if they're having to use third-party data to come to these conclusions, imagine how much more powerful it will be if you trust the Department of Defense with your data. That's the era. The age of digital is going to require humans to trust each other, to trust security, but also trust that provenance of data is going to be used for the right purposes. And, clearly we all want to make sure demand down to those suppliers tells us, hold on to that line 2 more times because the demand is there, but also having the honesty to know we've just taken a catastrophic hit or we're making a pivot. Don't surprise the Department of Defense.
Well, General Simerly, you kind of started off, down this path talking about the different supply chains, but there are published analysis about how poorly the Department of Defense manages its many programs and equipment. Would you please explain how vast the department's supply chains are, government weapon systems to commercially bought items, and talk about the various risks within those supply chains?
Back on that question.
Yeah. Thank you. So
It was my PAO training. If you don't like the question, just answer the one you think you like.
Yeah, I would hate to turn the panel into an information briefing on DLA specifically. But, going back to what I referenced before, for us, 9 supply chains. And by the way, the big one that we don't have is munitions, and each of the services manage that, although we do have a critical materials component of that that's relatively small compared to the service responsibilities. But one of the things I really like about the way we've been discussing and focusing on our challenges, munitions, that I think we can apply is magazine depth, that phrase, right? So as we think about the depth and risk within our supply chains and what we've been either to accept as acknowledged or unacknowledged risk, I think our equation has to shift, as I mentioned before, the shift from ruthless efficiency to resilience that allows us to achieve the magazine depth that's going to give us the opportunity to sustain the future fight in a protracted era of conflict. So I think, that's framing the problem set for us. And it does matter, the specifics about each supply chain. I know we've got many sectors that are represented here, and some are healthier than others. And some of them are things that are rely upon strictly from domestic suppliers, as I mentioned. Others, we've got international partners as well that we can add depth. I'm really proud of efforts in the department and each of the services, for instance, with the regional sustainment framework, to be able to take advantage of forward partner capacity for repair and supply. And we think within DLA, we've got a role there to make sure we've got the provisioning right at that point of repair for each one of the services projects. So there's going to be plenty of growth there, and especially with this focus on partners. AUKUS is a tremendous opportunity that we have in the near term in support of Navy and soon to be Air Force priorities. And we think there's analogies for all the services in those partners. So I think I'll end there and let my partners comment.
And I just say for all of you, keep an eye on what is happening in as all nations are recognizing the sovereign responsibility to rebuild their defense manufacturing base. There are clearly allies and partners who have tremendous human capital that are bringing manufacturing back to life after periods of non-investment, and American companies that can go in to create for Mark and for the G4 and for joint logistics, those trusted local suppliers that are inside a DOD standard for security and standards, but are taking advantage of that local solution that helps us replace, because just-on-time logistics from the United States, we've all heard it. We have printers in our basement that are manufacturing parts because it's just not fast enough. The concept is changing to dispersed contested logistics. Part of that strategy is what I really like seeing is this regional sustainment commands, but taking advantage of those local resurgence of manufacturers. There is a role for U.S. companies to be out there help them understand the standards that NATO and others are going to require of them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, well, one, I'm gonna actually push back on that question, right? So, obviously, our operational environment continuously changes, right? The threat changes, and we have to adjust our fleet strategies, right? The utilization of our equipment, and that has second and third order effects on the industrial base and the supply chain, right? It just does. So I mentioned that earlier, not necessarily as an excuse. Because with data today, we should be able to better project, right, based on the future operational environment, how we're going to utilize that equipment or weapon systems, and then what maintenance will be required. So, that predictive maintenance and or failure rate, right, all of that can be incorporated into better project what we're going to need on the battlefield in the future. Years ago, we had data, but it was not quickly available or analyzed, right? And produce the information that we needed to make those projections, right? Or forecasts. Now we do. So we need to accelerate the use of that, and then incorporating, right? So that's from a demand perspective. Then from a supply perspective, incorporating all of the available capabilities, whether US, right? Allies, partners, industry, U.S. industry or allies industry. We need to figure out how to synchronize all those efforts to produce the best support capability that we can where it matters, right? So we keep talking about data. We keep talking about, right, the technology that we have available today. We need to accelerate that so that this question tomorrow is not asked, right, or stated the way it is, that we poorly manage our programs and equipment, but that we're flexible and agile to respond to the threat and the operational environment in an effective manner, right? That's going to be the way that we are going to execute our missions in the future. So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Liz, you just set him up for his catchphrase, and since we only have 8 minutes left, if you don't say it, I'll have to say it because I had to do research on you because I don't show up at panels without knowing your bank account number. But go ahead.
I appreciate the setup, Mary. And we have iterated quite a bit about the importance of data. And you know what I've learned in my career and what I'm learning is about the importance of data, and that data is the most decisive commodity that we manage. In DLA, we manage critical commodities, fuel, food, go down the list of our 9 supply chains, but the most decisive commodity we manage is data. So we have to find the opportunity in that. So thanks for the opportunity.
It's on my page in case he didn't say it. That's your catchphrase. And as someone that works to help Defense Department partners and industry transform into this age, my favorite quote is "Get busy living or get busy dying." So on that, I think we could probably go to questions.
Alex, can we just skip the next panel because it's a pile of questions.
8 minutes. Get hot.
Get hot. All right.
Get busy, moderator.
So get busy question or get busy getting the hook. I'm going to skip ahead to a different question here that we planned for. The lifecycle managers, for the most part, if not all, major weapon systems reside within the various program offices within the PEO structures of the military services. The decisions they make to trade off long-term sustainability for near-term capability and speed underpin supply chain performance for years to come. How is your organization able to influence those decisions and provide any examples?
Yeah, so I can get that started since we're talking about life cycle management commands. So yes, I think a couple of things that have happened in the Army that have enabled better and more efficient synchronization of efforts from capability development, right, or capability gaps to capability development with the CFTs. To the acquisition of those material solutions, right, with the PEOs and ASALT, and to sustainment of those capabilities. That relationship, in my personal opinion, is stronger. Now, obviously, there are still areas of friction, right? Because yes, resource constraints is everywhere, right? That is also on the ASALT side. Where we plan a strategy to procure, right, a certain number of systems, and then suddenly we just don't have the resources to do so. That number goes down, and is a trickle down effect because that equipment that we intended to divest is we're going to have to keep for longer periods of times, right? So all the synchronization and coordination that is happening much earlier in the process today has been critical to ensure that we have long-term sustainment plans and capabilities when that material solution is fielded, right? We are getting left of that, being involved, our material command being involved in all the way from, again, that capability gap assessment to the capability development process and again, the acquisition process also. But we will always have, to make trade-off decisions because that's the business we're in, right? As long as we inform, influence, shape those decisions because we're providing the right, picture for the decision makers at that time. And being part of that decision process is key. So we have improved that significantly in the last few years. More so, and I'm not going to talk specifically, processes, but we have a tri-chair, again, AFC, ASALT, and sustainment to write AMC for sustainment with ASALT in partnership with ASALT. That we look at every single capability, and this process is pretty comprehensive, to look at, again, from a procurement perspective to all the way sustainment and the cost associated with sustaining that capability for the Army. And we are part of the decision process, understanding, again, that trade-offs will occur, but having the opportunity to influence and shape those decisions, inform those decisions, has been a game changer lately. Having advice that looks at, affordability and execution of those strategies and plans is also helps, right? Because everyone understands that we're looking at any capability holistically and not just to procure, the next great object and field it, right? It is sustainability of that capability long term.
This, as a stakeholder and an old general officer that used to have to materially develop in the stovepipes from requirements to capability, I can stand as a witness to say what you said is real. What I see our intelligence team of teams able to think about, conceive of, drive through the process from requirements, Army Futures Command to the field, is very different than the world that most of us in this room who are my age or a little or younger, experience. So we need to keep on with that compression on decision and for those of us who are cynics saying, why is it still taking too much time? Consider where we were 5-6 years ago and consider where we are today. We should be proud of that, but continue to increase the speed.
And I will just add to that by emphasizing the importance today, increasing importance of how we can be very precise and accurate in our demand forecasting as we think about life cycle sustainment of our equipment. One reason why it's more important now is the fact that we're moving more and more to commercial off-the-shelf introduction of capabilities. And there's a potential for taking shortcuts and not to measuring the sustainability factors at the right stage, right? And we can see certain platforms right now where there's some risk that we've accepted, probably unacknowledged. And then the fact, we used the term earlier, obsolescence. I think obsolescence is an obsolete term when it comes to the reuse, reutilization of Army kit. 113 Bradley is a good example of that, right? So, that's where we're going back. We've already made decisions long ago as we've created an acquisition life cycle, but we have to revisit them. And, General C.Q. Brown had a discussion with logisticians recently, which is pretty notable because I don't think the chairman had ever visited DLA headquarters before. And he told us we must be integrated by design. And that was his counsel to us as sustainers. And it was very coincidental and good timing. We were doing an assessment of how effective we are in meeting our 10 responsibilities in the Combat Support Agency Directive. It's coming for all CSA. So 10 tasks that we have to do. One of those is the role that we play in the requirements process in the JROC overall. And so that, and right now, and for a while at least, we're red in that category, and we need to get green so that we're better integrated in that process. We have the mechanisms to do that, but I don't know that we've had the emphasis to ensure that we're making the right decisions in the right way.
I'm looking for a softball question because I have 90 seconds left. The 2024 NDAA requires that the SecDef to set up a program and demo and prototype solutions to contested logistics challenges. Section 842. Is the Army and/or DLA participating in the program? If so, what lessons have been learned?
Yes.
And it's great.
Yes, twice, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's ample opportunity for this. Certainly we're seeing it in the Army with Army Futures Command and the focus on the contested logistics, CFT that's out there, plenty of other things beyond that as well. And we're seeing in all the other services. And it's necessary as we think about where we are today, the risk to our fight. And I really like the language that was used recently where we said, as a nation, we're in an undeclared state of emergency, right? And I know you all read the Defense Reformation article that's out there, but it says the only requirement is winning. And so, we have to find how we're going to sustain the surge and protraction of future conflict so that we can win through sustainment.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Well, I'd like to thank the panel and thank you, AUSA, for putting this together. Thanks.